Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney.
And Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice.
Welcome to today's episode, where we are going to talk about the idea of teaching and showing other people how to value you. Are you asked to answer questions, provide expertise on your own time without compensation from strangers? Do you feel frustrated, annoyed, or overwhelmed when these requests come in, and then when saying no, discomfort and guilt arise?
The intention of today's episode is to help explore the origins of this pretty darn common pattern that is often encountered as women and also as women in medicine, and how we can add to our own education that our medical training was lacking. Takeaways include talking about how we can teach and show others how to value us as human beings with tremendous experience and expertise. So, Jessie, would you be willing to share a bit about what inspired this episode?
Yes, with the caveat as we start that episode is my vulnerable episode of sharing. And the reason I have decided to share it is that there are so many lessons in this for every woman in medicine that I know. And I believe that part of the guilt and discomfort of even having the conversation is continuing to the ongoing challenges. And so this podcast has come up because I receive requests for business advice many times a week, like email after email. And most of the time from people I don't know, or maybe I know them a little bit, or they're a friend of a friend is connecting them to me to get my advice about starting a coaching business, running retreats, getting CME, all of these things. And everyone who reaches out is super polite and kind and excited and inspired and wants to bring meaningful things to the world. And in their requests, they ask me a lot of specifics. And then I will usually, out of being a nice person, respond and send back an email response answering one question or giving a little bit of information. And inevitably, I get the next response of, will you meet with me? Can I pick your brain for advice? And it always comes with compliments, and I know is intended in this really beautiful way. But the expectation is that I should do that. And actually, it's interesting because as I said that, is it my expectation I should do that or their expectation I should do that? I always assume it's their expectation, but I don't actually know, to be fair. And I literally cannot not help in my inner being and feeling aligned. I don't want to disappoint people. I don't want to feel guilty if I don't offer my help. And even in thinking about not offering my help, I feel guilty, just so you know. I also really, really don't want someone to think badly of me or say like, oh, she doesn't care, she doesn't help. And I know there's a whole noise in there. And I'm thinking, well, I know what I should do, but I can't do that because I'm afraid of this other thing. So I coach people on this all the time, right? You shouldn't worry about it. You should do what's aligned and authentic. And there is part of this which is a time issue. I don't have an ending time. We all have limited time and capacity and lots of competing priorities. So it's partly that. But it's partly the energy that comes up for me with this guilt and obligation and not wanting to disappoint people. And that's not the energy that I like to have or that I like to make decisions from. And what I noticed particularly is I have gotten quite good at not going to a conference and giving talks for free or not, volunteering my services for lots of things. But this specific question is really a challenge for me. And one of the things that's specifically a challenge for me is that it's always a fellow woman physician. And I think in medicine, um, we were all raised to be helpful people. We're all helpers and givers to our own cost very often. But there's something about your fellow sisters and sisterhood that's asking you that brings us to a whole different level. There's also something in it that we feel like we should ask. It's okay to ask. Um, and I might also just to be have done this to other people. And I've started to think about what it feels like on all ends and what message are we sending to others by doing this always? And what message, even by just keeping it within the sisterhood circle, there's still a message that what we're offering isn't of value or is of great value, but asking to be valued for that time, energy, or expertise. And so I am certain that what I just shared, while vulnerable, is really familiar to many of you, and that to avoid disappointing others and feeling guilty, you give to the point of resentment, exhaustion, and depletion. And that many of things that you give for free are tremendously valuable. And that some people, for giving the exact same thing, get paid a lot of money to do. And some people aren't expected to give it. They aren't asked to give it, and or they project something out into the world that suggests that you wouldn't even ask. Because I notice in different settings with different people, people don't ask. They always offer to compensate or support. And so I encourage you to pause and just notice the things, the talents, and the wisdom that you share in the name of service or to be a good person or to be helpful. And to take a moment to pause and think about how many years of study and practice and self sacrifice and money went into learning all of those things that you offer and share um, in the spirit of helping. And curious about why we take this helper role to a whole other level when it comes to the sisterhood. And I'm looking at Ni Chang as I'm talking about the sisterhood, right? Why do we do that? And where does it cross over from supporting one another, which I am fully in support of. And I think that as women, we often don't support one another well, to devaluing each other. And what if supporting each other and valuing each other meant signing up for things or paying for things? And what if that was the expectation? What might change about how people value us and appreciate what we have to share?
So I have a response to the why is it this way? Why are these expectations out there, especially amongst women physicians? And I think part of it is that like we were raised this way, and then there was a culture that was ingrained in us, even starting potentially in elementary school, all the way to college and then medical school and then your training. And of course, we want to be helpful. Of course, we want to be as helpful as we can be, sometimes to the point of self harm and like making ourselves burnt out from over giving and overextending ourselves. Uh, it was a very fine line, right? To walk. And I can admit that for the longest time, I was rather concerned that because I gave 200% of myself in training, that like the lack of sleep and the stress that I was subjecting myself to had something to do with my breast cancer diagnosis too. So, yes, we are healers, we are helpers, and we do already heal and help others. But my question is, at what cost? Not just monetarily, but also mind, body, and spirit cost. And that's what we're having an open and honest discussion about today. And so thank you, Jessie, for being vulnerable about this topic and sharing your lived experience.
The other thought I have here is, even if it doesn't cause harm, should we be doing? And what message does it send? And I'm just thinking about that. My husband asked me, he's like, "Why do you always help? Why do you respond? Why do people keep asking you this?" And I started to realize that, like, it's really a habit, and it's really coming from guilt. And that, would it harm me to respond? Probably not, but it does harm. It leaves me feeling resentful, bitter, and frustrated. And it leaves me wondering, or it almost leaves me devaluing myself, because as I started to think about it, and I'm going to give some credit to my husband. This is a different way of thinking about it. He's like, "I don't understand why you would sit down and like share everything that you learned in a business course that you paid more than you paid for medical school to learn how to run a business. And you're just telling everyone how to do it. Like, why would you do that?" And spending a lot of time crafting emails and then having meetings. And because he works for me now, he has access to my schedule. And he's like, "What are all these people you're talking to? Why are you?" He's like, "I think you're running a business consulting company without getting paid for it. Sometimes it takes someone from the outside to notice." And it's just really, really interesting. And what I said to him is, "Well, that's what I was taught to do. Like, as a woman physician, you would never not help another woman physician. And yet the message that we send to the world, therefore, is that we give that away and there's no value." I also did start to realize that not everybody else gives it away. So in other professions, they don't, right? If you want to talk to a lawyer, you wouldn't call and say, "Oh, can I just ask you some questions?" "Oh, I just want to pick your brain." We don't expect that. Or, and even in medicine, if I were to suggest to someone, "Well, you should work with this person to help you do your website," they don't go to them and ask for their help for free, but they've just asked for my help for free because I'm a woman physician and that person may or may not be. And so we are telling the world how to think about us and whose work is of value and not. There are also people in medicine who are women physicians who actually charge a lot of money for this information, but you have to sign up for their groups. And I actually wonder, I'm like, how do they figure out how to feel like this is reasonable? And it is actually reasonable. It isn't how I would offer it, but to understand that there's value, right? Like, I can see that they are offering value and they're very clear about their value. So part of this is an internal learning of, wow, I have this value. And I started to think about my last 5 years of my journey here, starting a business. And like, I have worked with business coaches, I've taken classes, I have lost tons of sleep worrying about this. I've made mistakes and like now know what the right thing is. And I, it doesn't make sense to just throw that all, "Oh, yeah, sure, everybody, why not just come and hear all the things I learned?" So this might sound conflicting from somebody who throws out a lot of free stuff. Okay. But that is coming from me saying, "I love teaching yoga and this is going to help you." And I can't quite think of the word, but it comes from inside. It's voluntarily, freely offered. And same thing with a podcast, right? It's voluntarily, freely offered. We do it. And by the way, it costs us money to run a podcast. but but we do it for other reasons, and we love it and enjoy it, and it's self-initiated. So for me, that's part of it. The other clue is, sometimes it feels good to help, and very often, a single email response feels okay if it's just something simple. But when the clue to where you've overgiven is, it reminds me of the people pleasing. When you feel resentful, you've overgiven. When you feel like, wow, you don't feel respected, you've overgiven. And really, the first person who you're not respecting is yourself by overgiving. And we were taught not to do that in as women physicians. And so I think My wish in bringing this up is to give any of you who are putting yourself out there in places where you're overgiving of your expertise. For many of us, this comes in the form of tons of family and friends consults. And like a good daughter would help their dad's friend with their medical problem or get them linked up to something. Um, or as a pediatrician, I am always asked pediatric advice from family, friends, the grandparents asking about their grandchildren who are friends of my parents or on the sidelines or any of those things. And to recognize that we can be courageous and graceful and not just say, I don't do that, but like, oh, yes, that's something you should definitely talk to your doctor about. Or if people are asking me for business advice, that's something, you can work with me and I can be a business consultant. I do, as I realize I should do that. I have tons of that knowledge. And had I had that, it would have saved me years and a lot of money. um, so I think just recognizing where we're doing it, where we're overgiving it. And for me, leaning into looking at other people who value themselves and they are seen out in the world as offering something of value. And it doesn't even matter if what you're offering is of value, by the way. As long as you value yourself, you tell people what to think about you. So many of us undervalue ourselves, and then we wonder why we're not seen as valuable. And so, just an interesting thought, and an interesting thought about our expectations of each other. So,
So I'm going to reflect back before you continue that it seems like an inflection point. And we were talking about a prior episode at this point, I think years ago, that we did about not working for free. But this is, I think, rather different because your lived experience is now very different and you've now garnered years of really valuable experience, not of all successes. And I also want to reflect back to you that your journey, having kind of been through and witnessing most of it from Bora Bora back in 2019 to now, it has not been easy. Like it has not been this like smooth upward trajectory 100% of the time. In fact, it was like really challenging and hard. So I just want to like give you the credit that you deserve and also to uh reflect back to you the reality of what you've gone through. So what I guess my question for you is like when, because this podcast was born out of wanting to change something. So when did you notice that need to like move beyond your old habitual actions of like always being helpful, and then really confronting that discomfort of saying like, no, I'm not going to give you business consulting advice for free?
uh, well, this year, how's that? This month. But, and I don't, it was all of a sudden, and this is kind of what happens with coaching. I was like, wait a minute, like, why am I doing this? And why am I not valuing myself? And I've looped back into, for those of you who listen to the words of the year, I have this beyond word. I'm like, I'm moving beyond just being someone who doesn't value themselves appropriately. And I am literally going to step into what I always try to model what I coach on and what I encourage, which is to value yourself in the way that you want other people to value you. And if you want people to treat you in a certain way, you have to treat yourself that way. And I also, I mean, part of it is volume, where all of a sudden it wasn't just an occasional ask, which, I'm conflict avoidant. So I would often kind of not respond for a bit because I would feel uncomfortable or I would give a little thing. And then what I noticed is the I would get second and third. Well, oh, thank you so much for that. Can we just schedule a call? And then, I mean, I think in January, I might have had 10 of these already, and we're on January 20 something. Like, that's a lot. And so a couple things occurred to me. One, as you mentioned, running a business is really challenging. We do not learn it in medical school. And I feel a little funny saying this, but I have a successful business, and many people who've gone into coaching don't, or haven't figured it out and haven't sort of stuck with it, or whatever it is, right? And so that's why people are reaching out. And that has come at a huge cost. emotionally, physically, energetically. I actually think so. High school is 4 years, college is 4 years, medical school is 4 years, residency is 3 to 4 to 5, depending on what you do. And this has been a 4 to 5 year journey. This has been like business school, like it, or I have learned more and grown more as a human being, I think, than I did in med school. Comparisons maybe are not helpful, but yeah,
So this is like your self-made
yeah.
physician entrepreneurial fellowship.
Yeah, yeah, and the hours almost similar, unfortunately or fortunately. I think it's different when you're doing it for yourself and you love it, and I have loved it. So it's not that I haven't loved it. I think we also think that when we love something, we just share it because why not? And we want everybody to know and everybody to do it. But what I realized is with the help of my husband, who was like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And I hear you often, I sometimes ask you when I get asked to give a presentation, or this year I was asked to do something very different, which is not give just a 1 hour talk, but run a several day workshop for leaders in a certain specialty. And I was like, I have no idea how you charge for that. And what does that look like? And I struggled to figure out what my worth is. And so I started to realize as I was branching into these different realms that, like, wow, I actually could teach a whole course on this. I could do all of these things. And so then the question was, well, what do I want to do with it? And how do I want to share it? And I don't necessarily want to keep it all to myself. Like, I think that this knowledge is really important. It's not something we were taught in medical school, and it's something that we need, whether you're running a coaching business, a yoga business. There are a lot of fine points to doing that as a physician that are very different mindset wise and nuts and bolts wise. And I'm married to a lawyer, so maybe I get free advice, although that advice is not free, just saying. um, but to recognize that the legal considerations are different, the like business setup and structure is different, and that is an expertise that is really worth a lot of money. And we pay a lot of money, and we're totally fine paying people who don't know anything about it a lot of money, who aren't physicians and who don't have that information. And so I do want to share it. And for me, it's not, I don't want to run a big group coaching thing where lots of people come and I just give lectures, because I also think that one of the reasons that many people have gone into businesses and then not continued is because they haven't built them in an aligned and authentic way that feels good to them and feels good to their nervous system. And that is something that I feel deeply, strongly aligned about. And I would have to do this in a way that feels right. So what I have decided is that if people want that, I will do it, but I'm going to do it as like business coaching consulting, but I'm going to do it one-on-one because that's what I enjoy. And I think it mostly needs to be that way. And I'm going to continue to give away stuff that I want to give away that comes from me. And I do often tell people who reach out, like they want me to tell them how to run a retreat. I'm like, sign up for a retreat. Come, like you can see how I do it, but experience it. And you also, why would you want advice from someone when you actually haven't been on their retreat and you don't know what they do? Like, what if my advice is not at all consistent with what you do? And I often, I go on retreats partly because I want to take care of myself, and partly because I learn things that I like and don't like. Like, it helps you define who you are, and nobody else is going to offer what I offer anyway, because it has to be aligned with you if it's going to be successful. I do the same thing with, coaching. I say, well, if you're wanting to transition, like join the transition group, or get one-on-one coaching. Like, then if you want to run a coaching business, you can see how someone who does it does it. If you think that what they're doing is good. It's really interesting because I will say that most people don't end up doing that, because that's not, they want something, or they have something in their mind that they want. And I do think that in none of those places do I sort of go through the business nuts and bolts. That's really where you have to get business consulting. And I actually think it's fun. And one of the things that I have loved about this conversation and diving into this with my husband, aside from finally being able to move beyond feeling super guilty, well, it's a work in progress, by the way, but is that I now all of a sudden I'm like, wow, actually, I know a lot about business. And actually, like, I have basically gone to business school in the last few years, and it feels really good and fun. And I feel proud and smart and confident in that. And it's a piece of me that I had not been owning, and it feels amazing. So I think that when we can step into that, we benefit as a human being. And so for those people who want to start businesses, this is part of your journey, and getting coached on it and figuring out who you are and what you want to share and what you want to bring to the world is a key piece of that and a key piece of your personal growth. So for me, that has been the upside of this struggle. And sort of as we get to the end, recognizing that even talking about it here, even at the end, I still feel like, yeah, some people are going to think badly of me, and they're going to think I should be doing this. And who am I to think these things? And we were taught, I was raised to think that way. And that when we think that way about ourselves, that's the energy we put out in the world. So it is on me. I think I put out in the world the energy that, like, oh yeah, no problem. Um, and that maybe it isn't valuable. And so by owning the value, I then tell people how to treat me and how to treat other women physicians. And so curious about your thoughts, really, about this nuanced situation with how we treat one another as women physicians, and what can we do about it while honoring our sisterhood and honoring each other and sharing with the world potentially a different view of who we are.
So I'm going to use the Mindful Healthcare Collective as kind of an example because I am definitely guilty of having asked the sisterhood for giving talks to organizations that I've been part of for free. And this is outside of Mindful Healthcare Collective. But with Mindful Healthcare Collective, uh, and we talked about this a little bit before the recording of this podcast, Jessie, was that like, and also along the same lines of how you freely give yoga because that's something that you want to do. Uh, with Mindful Healthcare Collective, especially at the height of the COVID pandemic, we were offering like 3 to 5 free sessions amongst the 9 of us every single week. And now that's not happening, but for a multitude of reasons. And I haven't asked for more sessions, and people haven't freely wanted to hold more sessions, except for, of course, you who you've been the longest running contributor for those free sessions since then. So thanks to that. But the intrinsic nature of those free sessions, from my standpoint, because I did hold quite a few of them as well, was that it also benefited me. So there was like a mutual symbiotic relationship. Like I felt like I was helping other people and also I was helping myself at the same time. And so perhaps maybe use that as a litmus. Like if you are asked to do something or give information for free, um, resentment, if that's like the initial reaction, I think that's a good red flag, to be mindful about whether or not that shows up. And then also whether or not it's a hell yes.
Mhm.
If it's a hell yes, I still volunteer here and there for different nonprofit organizations, different talks or workshops, for free. A lot less than I used to because I have um, a lot of competing priorities now in my life for my time. But there is still that initial like hell yes, or like is there like a little trepidation or hesitation? So I think trusting our own initial reactions when we hear or see the ask is really helpful in getting down to truly how we feel about saying either yes or no to that ask. So I think there's an inherent trust, and of course mindfulness in approaching these situations that will inevitably arise. It's not now, it's just a matter of when.
I also think something you did when we started the Mindful Healthcare Collective that's a little bit different than this, and it might be the path to change for women physicians asking other women physicians. That's why I mention it. You asked us, would we be interested in being a part of it? And that was also at a time of extreme crisis. But we voluntarily said yes. And you said, I would like to have you for these reasons. But is this of interest to you? You have always asked when you've put out calls for people to do things only if it would bring you value, only if you feel like it, if you want to. And there is a very clear message of no shame if you don't want to do it. And in fact, some people have not are no longer a part of the collective and they don't want to do it anymore. And that's fine. And I think that it really was a no shame, no judgment zone. And that I think is really helpful. I think the other thing that I don't remember exactly whether you said it or, but being really clear up front that, this is a volunteer role and these are things that, might benefit you, but this is a volunteer role. It's not a funded organization. We have no funds. And so I think that's really important to and I'm thinking like in the future for me, if I ask people, I would, either say like, I would love to pay you for your time. And they can say, no, I'm happy to just help because sometimes that's true. Or they can say, well, these are the options. Or at least then you're acknowledging that there's value in what they're offering. And I think sometimes it's not clear, like maybe you're friends or maybe something, or even my conflict avoidant approach would be like, no hard feelings if this is too big of an ask, or, I realize this is even acknowledging the value of what you're offering um, and acknowledging not just a compliment, like, I'm so impressed with what you've done, it's super cool, but like, I realize that this is real valuable knowledge. Or do you know where I can get the knowledge? Or would you be willing to help me? And what might that look like? Like, you don't have to necessarily lay it all out, but I feel like throwing out some of that is going to ease the discomfort on all ends. Because I do believe we should help each other. And I think that oftentimes as women physicians, at least in my growing up in medicine, the culture, especially for people ahead of me, was not necessarily to support and help. They worked really hard to get here, so you should too. And I don't think that should be the culture. But I also think that by not valuing one another or just assuming things that can be really problematic going forward. And I have had some learning about this, and I love collaborating and I love working with people, but I also like to think, well, how could this help you? And so that's another thing that I have offered, like, well, I would like to do this with you, and this is what I can bring, or this is what I would offer. Is that of interest? That's a different ask. And or if someone does something that brought me tremendous value, I have really leaned into offering something back and just saying like, hey, that was really valuable. These are some things I thought that I would enjoy doing for you, or would any of them feel good? And I think that that real open communication about it can just open these lines of communication, because I think sometimes when we don't have the open communication, we feel resentful, guilty, bad, tired, exhausted, taken advantage of. And then the relationships just have that sort of uncomfortable edge to them, which I don't want. Like, I think the more connected we are and the more we work together, the more powerful we can be. So this isn't a call to, make everything under a structural formal agreement, but to think also about different ways of compensating and different ways of acknowledging value and appreciating value.
Yeah, and different ways of asking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jessie, for being vulnerable and being willing to bring this up in this real-time way and being open with sharing what you've been experiencing.
And I hope that it's helpful to others. And I would point out that it's wherever you give your expertise, and recognizing that, making sure you value it. And it doesn't even have to be monetarily, but how can you give it in a way that feels like you value yourself and encourage other people to value you? Remembering actually that I think the more that I used to voluntarily help and share on the sidelines, the more questions I would get, for example. And so I think we do have to tell people how to treat us and tell people that there's value in this and it's important, and it doesn't have to be done in a way where you feel guilty and ashamed. But the energy that you bring to the making those suggestions, if it comes from an inner strength, is much more beautiful experience for everybody. Because I also don't want people to feel bad about asking, right? I think we all have learning to do here, and that all of us as women physicians grew up in this rather confusing setup. And so we need to make it a little less confusing.
Yes, so it's like ask for what you want, but you have to ask in a way that doesn't devalue the other person
Or yourself.
or yourself. So that can get a bit challenging.
And is clear. There's a message here, and this can be another podcast, but this mindful communication. And how do you ask for what you want with intentional tone and energy, so that I think it's important, not that we can make other people feel a certain way, but we can be intentional in how we show up for things to grow cultures that feel good to everybody and honor each other and tell others how to value us as well. So thanks for listening to us today. We very much appreciate it. We would love it if you stay on for the mindful moment and gift yourself some pause and space and presence. And we would love it if you join us for Connect in Nature. It's a beautiful offering offered up this Labor Day. And I would love it if any of you want to join me for coaching, join me for a retreat, see how I do it, join me for a coaching group, see how I do it. And I will say that I am available for this business coaching and consulting, but ask me about it and we can figure out what you need and what feels aligned and authentic for the experience. So much love to all of you. May you all be safe, healthy, loved, and at peace in these rather chaotic, upsetting times. We'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes. And please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely.
Welcome to today's mindful moment, a moment of self-compassion for yourself as a physician and human, and a moment to appreciate and honor your value, and a moment to recognize any discomfort that might come with all of that. Taking a moment to ground yourself, if it's safe to do so. Notice the soles of your feet on the floor. Notice your sit bones on the chair, or perhaps not if you're standing. And if possible, close your eyes if it is safe to do so. If it is not safe to do so, please, please, please leave them open. Bring a hand to heart and another hand atop, checking in with your heart space. And if it's safe to do so, close eyes. Notice how you feel. Notice how you feel after listening to our discussion. Notice whether you feel guilt or shame or blame. Do you feel more valuable, less valuable? Do you feel nervous? Do you feel anxious? Do you wish things were different? Whatever feelings are coming up, let them be. Come back to the breath. Find the breath. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And take a pause. Pause to simply be. Be in your body, bringing mind, body, spirit, soul, everything all into the same space at the same time. Notice perhaps your heartbeat. Draw your attention to your heart feeding yourself first, remembering that if you don't value yourself, how can you expect others to? Let your heart be a reminder to value yourself first, feed yourself first, and tell others to do the same. Taking in a breath, nourishing your entire body, and noticing any uncomfortable thoughts. As you notice them, take in a big breath and let them leave on the exhale. Noticing the pause at the end of the exhale, the moment where your lungs have the lowest functional residual capacity, the least resistance, breathing in and out, letting go of resistance, allowing yourself to be in the moment, to be at one with your breath, with your heart, and with your body. Let yourself feel good from your fingertips to your toes, giving yourself permission to take care of yourself as well, to value yourself as well. Valuing from your little toe to your big toe, to your belly, to your heart space, to your hands. Valuing the lumps in your throat, your breath, your voice. Owning and appreciating and valuing the breath and your lungs for breathing, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Pause and enjoy. When you feel complete, lower hands, open eyes, and just take a moment and notice how you feel. Remembering that at any moment, on any day, you can take a moment to appreciate and value yourself, to refill and replete, and trust yourself. And when you do, you may go forth into the world, sharing that opinion of yourself with others, and they may jump on board, as they should. Have a beautiful day.